Thank you, Robert, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be able to contribute my humble share to the very interesting discussions that already started yesterday. Let me just get the slides up. I'm not sure how we can switch over to.
Presentation. I think it will.
Okay, there we go. And I'll just, okay, yes, that works too. So, okay, so I shall get started. Anyways, so yesterday in the first session, it was already alluded to that integration essentially holds a flavor of inequality and also a little bit of a hierarchy in itself. And I would like to build on this point about focusing on global value chains and how the labor seems to be divided across EU member states. And I will also like to touch upon what this means in this new normal, which is increasingly volatile and has brought about some changes in the way that global value chains might also be organized in the future. So here's an outline of my talk. Firstly, I would like to introduce what I mean by functional specializations in the first place, as this is the core of what I'm talking about, and explore these divisions that I already mentioned that exist in the EU context. Then I will suggest that there might be actually some sort of a functional trap going on in the EU CEE context especially, which builds on to this increasing notion of middle income trap that we hear of in the Central European context. And finally, I will make use of the data set that we have, which already includes the pandemic years, and sort of use it as an early evidence for what we are already seeing in this new normal. So what's quite well known is that the early millennial transformations, which is the theme of the conference, have brought about significant integration of the EU CEE countries into global but also EU value chains, particularly in the manufacturing sector. And so here you see the value added, which is contributed by foreign affiliates in the given country, and Ireland, which is of course a special case. If we take that aside, it is the Visegrad countries and the other EU CEE which really lead the way, meaning that they have contributed, they have integrated through significant foreign direct investment, so capital coming into the countries, and as a result, they became quite active in cross-border manufacturing value chains. And as a result of this foreign direct investment, which was very significant in the development trajectories of the early 2000s for the CEE countries, they became known for sort of being the Central European manufacturing core, which is a term that the chair Robert Steyer, together with my co-author Roman Stillinger, have coined. And here we are looking at the revealed comparative advantages, which are essentially the products that the individual countries export and how they are specialized in various parts of the exports. And we see that the circle, the red circle, is essentially countries which are very much specialized in the manufacturers and particularly in the machinery and transport equipment. So they would be essentially these Central European manufacturing core economies, and they are countries such as Austria and Germany on the one hand, so Western European industrial powerhouses, but also the EU CEE economies. And so this is essentially the well-known story of a successful industrial integration that we have witnessed over the early 2000s. But that does not tell the full story of what it means to integrate into global value chains. And that's where this perspective of functional specialization comes in. So you see that on the one hand, an economy can be specialized at the product level. So they might choose to, for example, produce manufacturers such as automobiles, which is the case in the EU CE context. But on the other hand, the global value chains, the way they are set, have given rise to sort of a trade in different tasks along the value chain. So it is not only products that are being traded, but it is also the individual steps along the value chain. And this is essentially what we mean by functional specializations, because a country can, on the one hand, be specialized in the automotive equally as, for example, Germany and Slovakia. But on the other hand, it is a difference whether they are doing the R&D or whether they are simply fabricating in the means of assembly activities. So our objective here is to capture these differences that exist in the functional aspect of these value chains. And we have implicit assumptions regarding the differences in the potential to capture value added along these different tasks. And we build on literature based on this. So the well-known smile curve concept, which says that the fabrication or the production aspect is the least attractive in this sense, but also this notion of functional upgrading, which can also lead to economic development. And so we build on my co-author Roman Stollinger's methodology, which he already proposed in his earlier work, and we quantify the extent of specialization using greenfield FDI projects, which are coming into individual countries. In the different functions. And we have the advantage that we have to our disposal the FDI markets cross-border investment monitor database, which includes not only information regarding the number of jobs which are created by each investment, but also the purpose of that established subsidiary. So this is, very much translating directly to what I'm talking about here by the different functions. And so we combine these different purposes to create 5 functions, which I have shown in the slide previous. So headquarters, R&D, is it fabrication, or is it some support services such as sales or technical support? And we simply just modified this revealed comparative advantage, which I have shown in the previous slides, but using this job data taken from Greenfield FDI. And basically, it's, as you can see from the formula, it's a play on the revealed comparative advantage notion by taking the share of the number of jobs created in that function over the number of total jobs compared to the analogous ratio in the EU context. And then we also normalize these values to range between -1 and 1, because this is also proposed in literature as the superior option. And what we find is that here, in contrast to the product level, the picture is a little bit different. So the countries highlighted in the green are the ones that are relatively specialized in the sort of the bottom of the smile curve or these fabrication activities. And they are exclusively the EU CEE member states. And rather, the other EU member countries are actually doing tasks which are despecialized in fabrication and are specialized in the other activities, including R&D, including marketing. And so this already hints at sort of division in the EU context that we are seeing. But to be sure, we also run some further exercises, and we do a number of clustering tests, and find that in different specifications that we test, it still comes out that there are 2 distinct clusters in the in the EU context in terms of these functional specializations, with the green circle being exactly the ones that I have highlighted in the previous slide. So exclusively the EU CEE member states as a distinct cluster, and then the remaining economies as a second cluster. And so this has the tendency to really show that there is a, borrowing the terminology from Baldwin, a dichotomy between factory economies and headquarter economies in the EU context. And that, of course, took the full time frame. So we're also interested in changes over time, and to kind of see how stable these patterns are and whether there are some signs of change. We also run what are called the beta convergence tests, which have been proposed by other authors to test the revealed comparative advantages, and we directly translate those to the functional specializations. And basically what this means is simply regressing the previous revealed functional specialization values or on the functional specialization values in the current period. And we do that for each of the functions, but combining the different countries together in each of the models. So essentially the coefficient of interest here is the beta. And if the beta would be equal to or would be smaller than 1, it would suggest that the countries are becoming more similar in their functional specialization patterns over time. Whereas if they were larger than 1, it would suggest divergence. So they are becoming even more distinct in the way they are specialized. And we see that there is some convergence because all of the betas, as you see, are less than 1. But on the other hand, you see that the fabrication highlighted in red is the one that proves the most stable over time. So it is the most difficult to change patterns in the fabrication function, essentially. And then we do a similar exercise, but by running the model for each of the countries separately. And here we utilize industry level data for the different functional specializations over time. And what we see is analogous to the conclusions reached by the previous exercise, which is that these functionally specialized countries in the fabrication function tend to be the most stable in their patterns over time. So as you can see, the Visegrad countries in Romania have much higher betas than the Western European countries and the Southern European countries, suggesting that they have the greatest difficulty in sort of shedding this fabrication status. And now, with the sort of crisis setting that we are finding ourselves in, they face this additional challenge that, as a fabrication economy, the job generating potential of FDI is the most volatile. So it's a little difficult to see, but there are the gray bars which highlight the crisis years, especially in the financial crisis and also the COVID crisis. And you see that the downfall that we witness in the number of new jobs generated by the FDI is most volatile in the fabrication. But on top of this, you see this declining trend of the fabrication, which never really recovered from the global financial crisis. And what's also relatively interesting to see is that rather than the fabrication, it is the sales which is now leading the way in terms of job generating potential of FDI activities. So this sort of builds also to the point of increasing, the global value chain theories, which are saying that globalization or globalization is only at the fabrication level, but rather services tend to be possibly the new future of globalization, possibly providing some alleyways for the previously fabrication-oriented economies, but that remains to be seen, of course. And we also see this uptick relatively in the fabrication after 2020, but still the fact remains that when times are uncertain and volatile, it's usually these capacity expanding projects which are categorized under the fabrication, which tend to fall the most sharply. And as a result, what is going on is that the fabrication oriented Central European economies are the ones that are seeing the greatest declines over time in the number of new jobs that are being generated through the FDI. So this chart shows only the fabrication function for both of the regions. But we see that in the Western European economies, it has been relatively stable over time. And so also the argument that that these less developed economies are taking away jobs from the West doesn't necessarily seem to be the case on the one hand. But what we see is that the previous model, which the Visegrad countries and also the EUC countries at large have relied on, is sort of drying out because since the financial crisis, it never has recovered this sort of dynamism of the early 2000s. Still, what we find is that if we just take the 2020 and 21, so only the pandemic years, and take the functional specializations only for those two periods, there isn't much change in the way that they are specialized. So this is, despite having such a downfall in the fabrication, still the limited amount of the other functions that they have attracted hasn't offset the relative specialization still, meaning that it remains to be seen whether they will be able to shed their specializations in this sense and explore some new alleyways. We see a little bit of the technical services in the case of Slovakia, which is notable, but still, because you have to keep in mind that this is on the one hand preliminary evidence and only includes 2 years of time, it has to be taken with a grain of salt as well. And so that would be essentially the main things that I wanted to show you today. And mainly, I would say that to conclude, it is this persistence of the dichotomy or this division of labor, which is the main conclusion of our study. And on top of this, we have this added challenge of not only to functionally upgrade, but this notion of resilience, which is coming into play. Because as I wanted to show you, the fabrication-oriented economies face increased resilience challenges, so to speak. So in that sense, functional upgrading can also translate to sort of an upgrading in the ability to have the sustained capacity to generate new jobs via greenfield FDI. And so, as a discussion point, I think it's also interesting to consider whether these technology-enabled support services really do offer a promising diversification route for these economies, because at least from where I'm coming from in Slovakia, there is quite a bit of optimism regarding these offshore service support centers, but there are, of course, many challenges related to that as well. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you for these insights. Any questions? One, two, three. Okay. One question. You said you showed that the jobs created have gone down. Could this not also be an effect of rising labor costs and scarcity of labor? You see.
So for this one, yeah, I mean, of course, there is various things that come into play, and of course, I mean, with these countries, as the wages go up, it becomes somewhat less attractive, possibly, to invest in the fabrication as well. But what you see is that it tends to mirror global trends. So it's not only in the Visegrad context, but if you look at it globally, there is a slowdown in the fabrication-related FDI, so sort of a drying out of offshoring in the traditional sense as well.
No, I just wondered when you were characterizing upgrading, moving across function specialization types, but there could, of course, be upgrading within a function. I'm thinking about fabrication, for example. So that depends whether the smile curve has changed its shape, no, in terms of value added. And it could very well be that within fabrication, Central and Eastern European countries are moving upstream in terms of what they fabricate.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so I guess the point is that the functional specialization is, of course, the only one dimension of means upgrading, and that's why I think this paper by Humphrey and Schmidt, which talks about functional upgrading as one channel of upgrading, is the way to look at it. And of course, product upgrading and also other process upgrading remains to be just as crucial. But it's sort of just bringing in an additional layer. So I fully agree with you. Yeah.
So I have two questions. One about upgrading and one about the general context of it. So the question about upgrading, I'm not really surprised by the findings. And if you look at the global scheme of things and the way the value chains are organized, why would there be upgrading if we don't have lead firms in this region, right? So this is sort of the way it works everywhere. But I just wanted to ask, because your upgrading data is very sort of oriented towards the product and the process. I was wondering if it's possible to do also from the labor side, so to look at the types of jobs or the skills involved or something like that, whether that would give you or perhaps the same, but a complementary picture. And the second question was more about the policy aspect of this. I was so curious because you said that in Slovakia there's quite a bit of optimism about business support services. How does that translate into government policy in terms of FDI attraction?
Right. Well, so related to your first question, I think the first thing to note is that, of course, it is not surprising, possibly from what we know already about the region, that there might be sort of this dichotomy. But that being said, this is all FDI data, meaning it's also that not only the lead firms are keeping the R&D and these activities in-house, but it is that the Western countries are able to attract additional FDI. So essentially, it's not from where they are coming from. So that provides sort of an additional layer. And with respect to the labor aspect, I'm glad you asked this. This is actually a part of a bigger project. In the second paper, we're exactly examining how this translates into different aspects of working conditions, wages, etc. So hopefully I will be able to tell you a little bit more when that project is finished. And with respect to the policies, so I would say these countries, I mean, tend to place their core emphasis on FDI attraction policies, so FDI incentives. And at least it is the case in Slovakia, although also in the case of Czechia, from what I know in other regions, that in the FDI promotion policies, they have explicitly included additional attractive support for these business process outsourcing companies. So they're able to enjoy additional tax incentives, cash grants, etc.
A very simple and parochial question. Did I read the statistics correctly in the sense that among these old member countries, Austria is actually closest to the new member countries in its structure?
Yes, so I think in the case of Austria, it was quite surprising that if you do these cluster analyses over time, in the early years, they would actually come to the sort of side of more the fabrication economy. So in that sense, they actually are one of the examples which have over time became more despecialized in fabrication, moved towards sort of an upgrading from a functional perspective.
There was a general downturn in area globally after the global financial crisis, both globally and in Europe. So doesn't the shape of your curve in a way reflect this general downturn in the volume and value of FDI? And related to that, would it be possible as an expert to relativize your findings in terms of what is the effect of per unit of FDI?
I'm not sure I understood it correctly, but if not, please correct me. So yes, absolutely, the volume has declined, but this is exactly why I also wanted to show you this final aspect, which is sort of, relative in the sense that we are already taking cover for the volume, because the way that the, revealed comparative advantages are set, it's relative. So even a decline in volume doesn't really affect the sort of the calculations. So in that sense, I would say maybe that might answer your question. I'm not sure. If not, I'll be happy to discuss further also over the coffee break.
I will. Just also two questions. I think maybe also already touched a bit. But I think one of the big issues, and this was discussed in the future of the automobile industry in these countries and so on, that basically the decisions with what is actually done in these countries is not in the hand of the countries, but basically it's in the hand of the foreign owners like Volkswagen and all these big companies. So it's very difficult for the countries itself to define what they want to specialize in, given the sort of ownership structures. Second related question, isn't it too bad that countries are still specialized in, say, these technical professions in a way? Because this is, at least if we look at Western Europe and Austria, these kind of technicians are becoming a scarce factor. So in a sense, it might be not too bad that these countries are still specialized in this sort of hands-on production processes, because this is becoming scarcer in the European context. Of course, this goes in the wrong way, this kind of specialization patterns, but this might be an aspect which should be considered here as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. And I guess it also relates to what Michael said regarding the smile curve sort of changing its shape. I agree. I think the analysis that we're doing now regarding how it affects wages and how it affects the working conditions might shed some light on this, whether it's really so bad to be really this fabrication economy. And sorry, what was your first point? Oh yes, regarding the automotive.
Decision structures in the automotive industry,
Yes,
for
for
example.
sure.
Who's taking the decisions how countries could escape if they really want to change this pattern?
Yeah, I mean, for the Central Eastern Europe, this is definitely one of the cynicisms that they face regarding this, that because they are so exposed certainly to the demand of the lead firms, they don't really have much say in what to do, and then they tend to be quite also desperate regarding the green transition and other aspects. But yeah, for sure, I agree.
Okay, then no other questions. Then thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much.